And a good Saturday evening to you all. We are back. It is another BS in a beer. We had some Big 12 football mania last night. And now, as we slide, it is different than the picture because in the picture it did have the purple wax on it. I did strip that off because, as you can see from the shrapnel here, it went everywhere. So tonight is Mogli from Caldera Brewing, somewhere up in Oregon, and I cannot recall where, Ashland, Oregon. And it is an Imperial chocolate porter. It is heavy duty, 8.5%, and it also is from 2014, just like yesterday's was. And porters, especially big ones, can take that age. So let us give it a sniff. Ooh, chocolatey, he says with surprise, but not really because it's supposed to be. It is an Imperial chocolate porter. We'll get a little bit going in there. Look at that! Actual foam and carbonation. And we've got a beautiful dog on the cover. And I should also mention this is the bourbon barrel aged version. And I am looking forward to that because that adds tons of flavor. So, since the beer is good, we're going to flip around and we're going to talk some weird ghost ships. And here we are over here. It's got a nice chocolate. Little hint of the bourbon barrel. Mostly chocolate and coffee. That's not necessarily a bad thing for anything, let alone a beverage. Because honestly, chocolate and coffee, they go hand in hand, don't they? So let's have a sip. 8.5% from 11 years ago from up in Ashland, Oregon. I really wish it was like Corvallis because that's just such a fun town name to say. Like Walla Walla, Washington, you know? Ooh, smooth, chocolatey. More sweet than bitter, which is actually surprising. But maybe that's the beauty of the bourbon barrel. It took the edge off of the bitterness of the malts. And the roasted malts especially. As you all know, like with coffee, the darker the roast, the bitter it is. Well, the same principle is applied to beer. That's why porters and stouts are much darker because they use a darker roasted malt as opposed to, like a pale ale or a lager or something like that. Oh, that's nice. That's like really sweet. And now let's see how it warms up over the next 20 or so minutes, half an hour. Ghost ships. And I'm not talking the mythological ones like, the Flying Dutchman and things like that. No, there are categories. There are some that are unsubstantiated, but, like urban legend. Obviously, the Flying Dutchman and those of that ilk, very much fictional. There is a category of historically verified quote-unquote ghost ships, and I say quote-unquote because, they classify it basically as an unmanned vessel that has just been set adrift, so completely unmanned, completely at the will of the tides, and there have been lots of those, and there's some really interesting ones. Some of them you may have heard of, but we will see. So we're going to start going chronologically with some of the bigger ones that I found. I found 7 of them. We have HMS Resolute, and for ship prefixes, HMS is in reference to usually any monarchy. In this case, it was Great Britain, and HMS would be Her Majesty's ship. And bonus fun fact, RMS as in RMS Titanic, that stood for Royal Mail Ship. So the HMS Resolute was laid down in 1850, and they designed it specifically for Arctic exploration. Why? Because that was the flagship of the ships that were going out in search of James Franklin's lost expedition from 5 years prior, 1845, in which they became stranded, and none of them survived. Ultimately, they did have to turn to cannibalism, but in the end, none of the men from the Franklin expedition came out of it. So then they found some of the traces on Beachy Island of the previous expedition, returned to Great Britain, and then came back. And then it was placed under the command of Sir Edward Belcher. And in spring of 1854, as they're in the Arctic, very northern Canada, the Resolute becomes lodged in ice to the point where it is stranded. So Belcher himself wasn't there. He arrived sometime in May of 1854 to assess the situation, and they realized that they couldn't do anything, so they had to abandon it. They took out all the pelts and whatnot that they were carrying, got them out of there, and essentially just left it. It did get loose and started drifting. Now, this is May of 1854, give or take, is when the Resolute breaks free and begins to drift. It's spotted on September 10th, 1855. A year and a half later, this thing drifted, and it was spotted by the American whaling ship, the George Henry, under the command of James Buddington, in an ice floe off Cape Walsingham, which is off of Baffin Island. And for the record, I think I put it up there, or maybe I can't remember, that's 1,200 miles from where they abandoned the Resolute. So this ship, completely unmanned and at the will of whatever, the winds and the current, drifted freely for a year and a half and ended up 1,200 miles from where it was. So they did salvage the Resolute and returned it to Queen Victoria the following year as a gift from the United States. Eventually, in 1879, it was stricken and broke down for scrap, and that is where the Resolute desk came from. You know what the Resolute desk is? Yes, you do. That desk. That desk came from the wood of the HMS Resolute that the Americans found and returned to Great Britain, and when it was broken up, Queen Victoria ultimately had the desk commissioned for the White House, which I think is very cool. Number 2, and this is a very, very big name one. Probably a lot of people have heard of this one. This is the SV, which stands for Sailing Vessel Mary Celeste. Canadian-built but American-registered brigantine that was discovered adrift and deserted in the Atlantic Ocean off of the coast of the Azores, which is a couple hundred miles off the coast of Portugal, I believe, on December the 4th, 1872. And the story goes as such. Captain Benjamin Briggs, who was in charge of the Mary Celeste, was preparing for a voyage from New York City to Genoa in Italy. He made arrangements for his wife Sarah and his then 2-year-old daughter Sophia to accompany him along with 7 crewmen. Around November 7th of the year 1872, they left Staten Island, and then 8 days later, and this is how they were found, 8 days later, on November the 15th, there was another Canadian brigantine, the Di that left for Gibraltar, but sailed the exact same route that the Mary Celeste did. So December the 4th, around 1 p.m., I guess the local time, the Di comes across a ship. The sails are askew and it's sailing very erratically. They hail the ship, there is no answer. They read on the bow that it is the Mary Celeste. So they end up boarding it. The lifeboat was gone. Absolutely no trace of any person was ever found. There was some damage to the equipment. There was about 3.5 feet of water in the hold, but nothing that would have sunk the vessel. So ultimately, they towed the Mary Celeste 600 miles to Gibraltar, and then it was basically purposely, it was ran aground off the coast of Haiti to collect insurance money. And that was the fate of the Mary Celeste. What the fate of the crew was, nobody knows. The lifeboat was gone, but the lifeboat was never recovered. I mean, obviously, it just makes sense they were overcome with something, some sort of weather, some sort of storm or, ocean problem, and they abandoned ship, but the lifeboat may not have made it. So we're going to take a pause. It's getting more chocolatey. It's getting more chocolatey, and that's what I like. Now the bourbon's really starting to come out. That is really nice. Really, really nice. I like that one a lot. Now, we move on to another SV, another sailing vessel. This is called the Resolven. I'd put up a picture, but I can't really find a sketch of it. There's no sketch of it. The sketch right there is the HMS Express that was drawn in 1874, and that was a Forester-class gunboat, which was similar to the HMS Mallard, which is the ship that found the Resolven. That's all I've got, which is really kind of cool and kind of interesting. Anyway, the Resolven herself, a merchant brig, which was found abandoned on August the 29th, 1884. The lifeboat was missing, and it was between the Bacalao Islands and Catalina in Newfoundland and Labrador. And yes, I did check with Maiden's World of Wax to see that's actually how you pronounce Newfoundland. They know the crew abandoned, but they don't know why. Because the last log, after they found it and after they boarded it, the last log was 6 hours before the crew abandoned ship. Nobody knows why. They said, other than a broken yard, which is one of the longer things across the mast, there was no damage to it, no damage whatsoever. The sails were in fine shape. It was perfectly sailable. And ultimately, they found out that not only the lifeboat was missing, the galley fire was lit, and the lamps were burning. So whatever happened, they left in a mighty big hurry. Between the last log, which said nothing of anything, 6 hours later, the boat itself being discovered unmanned and just adrift. And that is, it makes you wonder, like, where did the crew go? What happened? What caused them to leave in such a manner? But after they found, because it was relatively close after it was discovered abandoned, they returned it to service. And then it was wrecked again, and that's where it stayed in 1887 in a channel somewhere between Nova Scotia and Newfoundland while it was doing a pelt run, trading run. And ultimately, the Resolven sank again for the final time. But again, how weird is it that there is absolutely no photos or even sketches of this vessel? That really adds something. Next, number 4, the SV, the sailing vessel Carroll A. Deering. This is a cool one. This is a really cool one. Because you don't know. So I'm looking down because I've got a lot of notes, and I want to present this in a relatively factual manner. So it was an American-masted five-mast commercial schooner. It was launched in 1919, and it was found run aground with no crew off of Cape Hatteras in North Carolina in January of 1921. The story goes as such. Well, and they have a good theory. The story goes as such. It was Captain Willis B. Wormel set out for Rio de Janeiro on September the 8th, 1920, made it safely, dropped off, picked up, and went back. Now, on the way back is when things happened. It left Rio on December the 2nd, 1920. And again, it's found run aground with no crew a month later. So here's where it gets really weird. It stopped for supplies in Barbados, and then January the 9th, it left Barbados, sailing for Hampton Roads, which is the Virginia, North Carolina kind of triangle up there. It was next sighted January the 28th, so would that be 19 days later, by the Cape Lookout lightship off of the coast of North Carolina. It was hailed, and that photo right there, that is the last photo, and it's a photo. They hailed it and got a response. They said that they spoke with somebody, and they gave a description of just like a tall, thin man. So at that point, somebody was on that vessel. Now, let us continue on. Now, so this was January the 28th. January the 31st, so 3 days later, it was sighted at dawn by Surfman C.P. Brady, who was on lookout duty at the U.S. Coast Guard station in Cape Hatteras, North Carolina. At this point, it had run aground. It said it was hard aground. The equipment was very badly damaged. The wheel was shattered. The binnacle box had been caved in, and the rudder had become disengaged. The ship's log, all the navigation equipment, gone, along with all the personal effects of the crew and 2 lifeboats. The theory is mutiny because when they were in Barbados, one of the crewmen got a little drunk, got a little rowdy, got arrested. The captain, Captain Wormel, did what he did, but he bailed him out, got him back on the boat, but apparently there was just grumblings about the captain, this and that. So, prevailing theory, the crew mutinied. Whatever happened to Captain Wormel, we do not know. But they found the ship 3 days after it was being hailed. Run aground, completely damaged, with no sign of the crew at all. including the logbook, so you know that's why they took it, because the captain would have logged all of this in. It's really fascinating. And like you think about it, it makes you wonder, are there any, I mean, there might be some other shit. Oh, and by the way, the Carroll Deerling, they ultimately tried to remove it from where it had run aground, but they found out that it was actually impossible and blew it up with dynamite March the 4th, thus ending the story of the Carroll Deering. Like, how crazy. And you wonder, what in the world happened? And there's a couple more what in the world happens. That was 4. We've got 3 more to cover. Beer sip time. Excuse me. Really getting caramely. Really getting caramely and delicious. I love it. I love it. This one is kind of interesting. This is the SV, again, sailing vessel, the Governor Parr. In the list I was looking at, I looked at this one and I'd never heard of it, but I found the story interesting, so I thought I'd share it to you. Share it with you, I should say. It was a 4-masted schooner that was built in Parrsboro, Nova Scotia in 1918. And now we move on to October the 3rd, 1923, carrying 1 million board feet of lumber from Nova Scotia down to Buenos Aires in Argentina. I had to flip pages because there was a lot of notes. During the voyage, took severe damage. The mizzenmast and the spanker were just utterly destroyed. Captain Agnes Richards and 1 seaman lost their lives in the incident, but the remainder of the crew were rescued by the SS Schodak. Now here's the crazy part. Despite all of that damage, the Governor Parr did not sink. The crew abandoned it. They were found in the lifeboat. The crew abandoned it in the thought that it was going to sink. Well, she didn't sink. And was spotted again later, January the 1st, 1924, by the American Coast Guard's the UCCGC Tampa. It attempted to tow the Parr towards Halifax, but on the 2nd of January, the Parr broke free, and it continued to be sighted for many, many years. And this is why I like this. She remained, and as they put it, a derelict and a, quote, menace to navigation. I love that. Menace to navigation. And it drifted as far down south as, or up north, I should say, as the Canary Islands. What has happened to the Governor Parr? Nobody knows. It could be out there. It could have run. It most likely it's sank by this point. But for years after, they're talking years after, they were still spotting this vessel and couldn't do anything about it. And speaking of that, this is a good one. This is a really good one. Now we move on to another ship's prefix, SS, which is the generic catch-all term for any steam-powered vessel that's not, a flagship or a military ship. This is the SS Baychimo, a steel-hulled 1,300-ton cargo steamer that was built in 1914 in Sweden and owned by the Hudson Bay Company. Shout out to my Canadian friends. Mainly, it was for trade missions, for pelts in the Inuit sediments along the Victoria Island coast, right off on the western part of Canada, or Canada up near where Washington is. October the 1st, 1931, the Baychimo becomes trapped in ice. The crew left, traveled a half a mile over the ice to the town of Barrow, Alaska, for 2 days to get out of the storm. By the time the crew returned, the Baychimo had broken free. They ended up getting back on it, and then it became stuck again October the 8th. And October the 15th, it was still stuck. The Hudson Bay Company sent air support to get part of the crew and the expensive pelts, and left 15 of the remaining crew. But come November the 24th, a storm hit, and the crew abandoned it, and they presumed the Baychimo to be sunk. Mind you, this is 1931. No, she didn't sink. She drifted. It was last spotted, a verified last spot, was in the year 1969. So over 30 years later, they spotted this ship. They say a group of Inuit fishermen spotted the Baychimo frozen in an ice pack in the Beaufort Sea. More than likely, it has sunk from there, but You don't know. For 30 some odd years, the Baychimo just drifted, alone and unattended. I think that's really cool. I really think that's very, very cool. Like, what are the odds? I know the ocean is a huge place. We know the ocean is an absolutely immense place. But these were also merchant ships. So they would be in shipping lanes. You would think somebody would have come across it and noticed, like with the Mary Celeste, they would notice the sails askew and they weren't sailing properly. You would think that especially a cargo steamer would be spotted and somebody would have thought something of it. Or maybe, just maybe, people sailed right by it, didn't think anything of it because it was in a shipping lane and nobody, sometimes nobody notices what's hiding right in plain sight. That is just incredible because it makes you wonder, and obviously we don't have the technology now for tracking satellite things, or we have it now that we didn't have then. Where did this thing go? What did this thing do? How did nobody notice it? Like it broke free in November of 1931, and it was spotted in the year 1969. 38 years. This thing floated free and wasn't spotted by anyone. And on top of that, right on the coast, that's where a lot of the indigenous fishermen would be. And they know those waters. How did they not spot a massive cargo ship? The mysteries of the ocean. We're going to have one more sip. We're going to talk about the last one, and then we're going to get out of here because we love to talk about random things, and this one's going fast, and I'm really enjoying it. I'm actually shocked that, granted it's 20 minutes, but I thought I would only be at number 4 by this point, but we got rolling. Man, that is just really, really tasty. That is really smooth, and 11 years old, Mogli holding up like a champ. Kudos to Caldera Brewing because that is really nice, and the bourbon is really coming through. Does it say who it's aged in? Bourbon barrel, chocolate porter was aged in Kentucky bourbon barrels. That tells me nothing because all bourbon has to be made in Kentucky. No, it doesn't. All bourbon has to be made in America. Just most bourbon is made in Kentucky. And the final one, this was a more recent one. They absolutely know what happened, but the story itself is very interesting. This is the story of the SV Teignmouth Electron. And by the way, I put a list of all of these down in the description if anybody's curious to do a little more research, because I'm only, much like you would in the bar, you're only going to talk the cursory stuff to get people interested. And when they go home, like, I want to look this up. So the Electron was a 41-foot trimaran sailing vessel that was purpose-built for Donald Crowhurst's ill-fated attempt to sail around the world during the Golden Globe race of 1968. Unfortunately, Donald Crowhurst did not make it. They have the idea of what happened because at some point, because it was in a race, they were being, followed and tracked. He started reporting false positions and just kind of went out of hand. But when they found the ship, they found his logbooks, and that was the very chilling tale of what happened, because you can look at the logbooks as you get to the second volume. It's like it was written by a different person. Like it was literally a window into the captain, Donald Crowhurst. It was a window into his mental breakdown, like step by step of how he was thinking, and then all of a sudden everything changed, and ultimately he had a breakdown. And what they theorize, and actually what makes the most sense is eventually he just walked off. He just got up and walked off of the ship and never to be heard from again. And you have to think, like, what an isolated feeling it would be, especially in like the Southern Ocean where there is no landmass to block all that wind. Like, it would be very disconcerting to be on a vessel, any sort of vessel. And in every direction you look, all you see is flat nothing. All you see is water. You don't see any land to break up anything. And apparently it was just too much for Donald Crowhurst, because he did what he did, and ultimately the Electron eventually beached itself at Cayman Brac, which is a small island in the Caribbean, and that's where it remains. That's where they found it. That's where they found the logbooks. As of 2019, it was still there, according to reports, but in a very, very advanced state of decay. So by 2025, there might not be anything left of it. And the picture there, I think, was from 2011. And that thing has been, I can't remember where, but it wasn't long after the race would have ended. So probably in the, 1969 or at some point, that thing would have ran aground, and it's just been sitting there ever since. But they did get the logbook, and that is just, it's crazy. And they grabbed, because he was so meticulous in his notes. In a weird way, he gave a very telling and very chilling window, and a front row seat into what essentially a human mental breakdown would look like, and that is very weird. And just very odd. But the whole concept of the ghost ship, I think it's been as long as there's humans, and we've figured out that we can do stuff to float. And ultimately, you think of it, every story that really has ever existed, be it of the cryptid nature, like, Bigfoot, Sasquatch, the Loch Ness Monster, ghost ships, things like that. Everything is based somewhere, somehow, on a grain of truth, or in a kernel of truth, as they say. It kind of makes you wonder, what in the world was it for these? Maybe just passing, a ship, or some ship from a neighboring village that had gotten loose and was just floating by. And, and in the moonlight, if you see an unmanned vessel going by, you're going to think it might possibly be a ghost ship. But that was really cool. And, because it's Halloween, you got to inject a little spooky into the situation. So we're going to have our final sip of this on camera, because I'm going to finish this later while watching television. And then we're going to get out of here. But as the spooky season goes, next week, here's the tease. Friday is Halloween. I'm going to think of something Halloween-ish to talk about. And then Saturday, we're going to move to the next... we'll end college football Saturday by talking about, I think it should be the Big Ten. But I don't know. I don't know what I'm going to do. Taking comment suggestions. I have an idea of something I'm going to do if I can't think of anything else. But down in the comments, what would be an interesting Halloween one to talk about? We will see. I even picked out, hopefully, a relatively Halloween-themed beer. It's a 2012 beer, so it's going to be scary one way or the other. We're going to have one more sip. This is American, so I don't have to butcher a language other than English. Cheers, my friends, if you're having one along. Man, that is dangerously smooth. It's one of those, you just wouldn't know how old it was. But I'm going to leave you with this final parting thought. If you think about it, muffins are to cupcakes what smoothies are to milkshakes. Have a good night, everybody.